Check, 1, 2. And yes, I did not put it horizontally, which I told myself and reminded myself that I was going to do, was to place this horizontally, but we're gonna have to stick with vertically today. It's like the last minute thing that I was supposed to remember to do. It's like before the thing says go live, remember to tilt your phone to landscape mode and start there. But true to form, I did not do that exactly. Bear with me for one moment. Do want to make sure that I represent as a Southern California voter. Today was election day, so I do want to represent that to the fullest. We have a lot to get to this week. I know that they're not, the greatest fights coming up this weekend, but there are sure a lot of bits of news to cover. There was some sensational action over the past, 72 hours. Might as well put the second sticker on here as well. They give me one sticker while they mail me the election instructions, and then they give one more sticker when you actually place your vote. So why not wear both? Sporting the Raekwon only built for Cuban Links tee today. Or only built for Cuban Links 2. That would be the sequel to that only built for Cuban Links saga. But yeah, some of the things that I want to get to today. There are some bits of news. There are a couple fight announcements. There were obviously some pretty heavy-duty fights taking place over the past 3 days. There was Inoue versus Nonito Donaire 2. There was also Devin Haney versus George Kambosos, or should I say George Kambosos versus Devin Haney, the battle for Undisputed at lightweight. I want to definitely recap that and just discuss its aftermath. I want to talk a little bit about, judging, bad judging, good judging. Want to discuss whether there should be a Kambosos versus Haney, or now we should say Haney versus Kambosos rematch, or whether Top Rank and Bob Arum, and Devin Haney, whether they should, take their ball and look elsewhere, depending on whether George Kambosos wants to exercise that rematch clause. I also want to talk a little Stephen Fulton versus Danny Ramon, some Kenichi Ogawa versus Joe Cordina. That was on the DAZN side. Junior Fa versus Lucas Brown. That was an upset. I want to give a little pound-for-pound update. And then I want to preview Hot Facts with Robert Reese. Yo, what's happening with you? Thank you for stopping by. Want to get into some pound-for-pound talk? Preview growth through calisthenics. What is good with you? Thank you for stopping by. Heck yeah. Yeah, we have some good items to get into this week. This is going to be a fun one, not only because of the action that took place last weekend, but also just some of the stuff that we have to forecast. We also want to preview the upcoming fights, which it's not the best fights coming up this weekend. We're talking Edgar Berlanga versus Romer Alexis Angulo, Jaime Munguia versus Jimmy Kelly, Trevor Bryan versus Daniel Dubois for one of the lesser heavyweight titles. We've also got some 2022 Boxing Hall of Fame talk to get to. Some of the names that are going to be appearing, and inducted into the Hall of Fame include Miguel Cotto, Roy Jones Jr., James Toney, who was actually held out of the Hall of Fame for some time, Holly Holm, and others. Also want to talk about the, somewhat, I guess it's news, that there are no stumbling blocks to making Errol Spence Jr. versus Terrence Crawford. We'll dig a lot deeper once there's something a little bit more concrete. But it looks like if you believe all parties and what they're saying, that it's likely that that fight is going to be made. There's also Artur Beterbiev versus Joe Smith Jr. Now, that fight is taking place not this coming weekend, but next weekend. So we're going to touch a little bit on that. But if we're taking it from the top, I'll wait for a couple more heads to trickle in before we get into the news bits. But the two biggest fights that took place over the past few days, well, you got to extend that to 3 fights, because Ogawa versus Joe Cordino, well, Stephen Fulton versus Danny Roman, that was a big one. But the two biggest were George Kambosos versus Devin Haney, and then Naoya Inoue versus Nonito Donaire 2, which actually just took place at like 5 o'clock this morning, West Coast time. So without further ado, Jay Foreman. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, I'm going to believe that Spence versus Crawford is taking place once they actually sign on the line. Other than that, it's, a lot of hearsay and a lot of speculation. Although, I mean, you would think that the fighters involved, I mean, they're getting paid a good amount per fight either way. But if they don't make the fight, the blemish that would be to their legacies if that fight doesn't take place, I mean, it's going to be a mark on each one of their legacies. It's almost like how Adonis Stevenson and Sergey Kovalev never locked horns. That was the most important fight to make at light heavyweight, and it simply never got made. So hopefully cooler heads and smarter heads, compromising heads prevail, and that fight indeed gets made. But let's talk a little Devin Haney versus George Kambosos, and Devin Haney becoming, Naoya Inoue is cold. Did you guys think that, I was kind of back and forth. Of course, you would favor Naoya Inoue in the rematch there, but Nonito Donaire was looking so good in his last 2 fights against Ubali and against Gaballo. I didn't expect him to get, flat out blown out in the way that he did. And you know what? I'm actually more inclined, now that you mentioned that, to kick this one off with Naoya Inoue versus Donaire 2, rather than getting right into the aftermath of George Kambosos versus Devin Haney. So what did we see? We saw the bell ring. We saw both fighters, somewhat reluctant in the first half of the first round, kind of feeling each other out. Although you saw Nonito Donaire was coming forward. He was looking to get something going early. He was looking to earn Naoya Inoue's respect early. But what happened? I thought that I saw Nonito Donaire kind of reaching a bit. Like he was overextending himself to try to land something cleanly early. And in an otherwise slow round, you saw a few connections, but you saw a couple hot exchanges where nothing landed super cleanly, but you could see that they were both going for home runs with the punches that they did throw. And it wasn't until there was about 45 seconds left in the first round that the action really picked up. And as soon as the action picked up, within 20 seconds of the hot exchanges starting, you saw, I'm trying to think of who pointed it out, but Naoya Inoue threw a feint where he was kind of feinting a hook, and then he got Nonito Donaire to react to that hook. So Nonito Donaire then kind of sold out with his punch attempt, and then Naoya Inoue caught him with a short right hand, and it was such a clean right hand. And in baseball, they say you wrap your bat around it if you got all of it. And Naoya Inoue got all of it when he connected with Nonito Donaire, to where I don't think Donaire ever recovered from that initial contact. You saw him trying to, regather his bearings. Stan Tucker, what's up? Hey, thank you for stopping by. And I know you've got a lot to say about, about some of the action last weekend as well. But as soon as Nonito Donaire got hit by that Naoya Inoue right hand, he fell to his bottom. He got dropped on his butt. And when he was steadying himself, sometimes you'll see somebody get up and start stumbling around the ring. Well, Donaire stood up, but he was kind of frozen. It's almost like if you say you get up from sitting too long and you could instantly tell that your legs are asleep. You know, when your legs just kind of go to sleep and they have that super electric tingling feeling, you almost know not to do too much walking around because you know that you might fall forward if you do. So, Ventru, what's going on? Thank you for stopping by. Heck yeah. And you know that if you take a step, that you might end up falling over again. So it's almost like Nonito Donaire just stayed put to kind of steady himself, to give himself, you know, hopefully a few seconds to recover while the ref administers his instructions. Well, you could tell by the way that Nonito Donaire, by the way, he was lucky to get saved at the end of that first round. So then he goes back to his corner, and even the way that he walks back to his corner, his back was so upright and kind of stiff, and you saw the way that his mouth was open, you just knew, oh no, this is not good. And then when they replayed the punch, you saw that Inoue right hand landed right, basically one of the worst places to get hit, which is splash on the side of the head. So going into the second round, Donaire gets up, and you could tell that he's trying to bounce around in a way where it's almost like he's trying to convince himself as much as the opponent that, okay, he's all right. But as soon as the bullets started flying again and he got hit by, this time, a left hook, you saw that he was on unsteady legs. And he sustained a good amount of damage beyond that point. He started getting hit by a few combos. You started seeing Donaire throw some desperation power punches to try to turn the tide. But every time he got landed cleanly, you would see him start backing up again. And then finally, you saw him get landed very flush with that left hook to where he took just that big step where he almost got dropped by that punch. Then he went back into the ropes. I thought the ref was going to call it off by that point. But unfortunately for Donaire, he got hit with a couple more combos that ended in a right hand that drilled him and dropped him flat on his back. And then the ref waved it off. Even though Donaire, to his credit, beat the 10 count. So just a monstrous, pun intended, performance for Naoya Inoue. Looking absolutely scary at 118. I don't think he sticks around and fights the only other belt holder in that division. So it's Paul Butler, right? He's the only other belt holder. Naoya Inoue now has 3 of the belts at 118. And James, what's going on? Thank you for stopping by. Heck yeah. James, yeah. Good commentary, you know, earlier with your, I think it was a couple days ago when you were weighing in. That was pretty sharp. And I read it today and I'm like, yeah, good point. I don't think that Naoya Inoue is going to pivot to fighting Paul Butler. Like Ring Magazine, for instance, has Paul Butler, the only other belt holder in the division, ranked number 10. So that shows you that the minds that follow boxing don't see Paul Butler as being a credible threat. They see him as being a belt holder. And I try to draw a distinction as much as possible between belt holder and champion. Sometimes the way that you earn the belt matters, and also, have you successfully defended your title? I think that these things matter. But Paul Butler is the other belt holder. So it's going to be a question of whether Benny Bronx, what's going on? Always dropping some hot commentary. Heck yeah. Yeah, thank you for stopping by. I don't think that Inoue is going to pivot to Paul Butler unless it's a desire of Inoue to capture all 4 belts at 118. But and he has kind of stuck around, right? We've seen him fight mandatories for the sake of keeping his titles, like when he fought Des Marinas and Maloney and some other guys, right? We've seen him stick around to kind of belt gather. Then he's had the 2 fights with Donaire. I feel like it's appropriate, unless he fights Paul Butler, who again, Ring has ranked number 10 in that 118-pound division. So, for instance, Rashid Warren or Rashidi Ellis is ranked higher than Paul Butler. There are other guys, John Riel Casimiro, who's a little bit of a head case, right? Like he did beat Guillermo Rigondeaux in one of the most baffling, boring fights you'll ever witness. He did, he's a good fighter, but he seems to be somebody who is just unpredictable to the point where you can't even reliably expect him back in the ring anytime soon, because he's actually the guy who was ranked number 3 in the division behind Naoya Inoue and Nonito Donaire, John Riel Casimiro. But other than that, you know, Donaire's beat the number 4 guy, Emmanuel Rodriguez. He's beaten the number 5 guy, Jason Maloney. But then you've got Rasheed Warren. You've got Gary Antonio Russell, one of the Russell brothers. But I don't think that Inoue, unless he fights Paul Butler to become undisputed, I don't see him sticking around at 118. I think he's pretty much proven his point in that division. Still undefeated, still just one of the knockout kings, pound for pound, one of the most devastating pure punchers in the sport. You couple that with his hand speed, his boxing acumen, his punch placement, and just everything he's got going for himself. It's just a handful, especially at 118. So does he go up to 122 and battle Stephen Fulton, who right now is holding 2 of the 4 belts? And we just saw Stephen Fulton make easy work, really, of Danny Roman, who's a very respected opponent. Like, I thought that this was going to be, you know, I'm talking Stephen Fulton versus Danny Roman, former unified title holder, not undisputed, holding all 4, but he held 2 of the 4 belts. It was MJ Akhmadaliev who beat Danny Roman to take his 2 belts, so that Danny Roman, who basically had a long road to his title capture, had another crack at the title, this time against Stephen Fulton. Stephen Fulton won just about every round of that fight, to the point where the judges, 2 of the 3 judges, gave Stephen Fulton every single round of that fight. And then the only other judge, the 3rd judge, gave Danny Roman 1 round. So Stephen Fulton won. He ran the table, won all 12 rounds against Danny Roman in the eyes of 2 of the 3 judges. So Stephen Fulton had that super close, disputed win against Brandon Figueroa, somebody who's just another nightmare at 122. Like, I think that MJ Akhmadaliev versus Brandon Figueroa would be extremely entertaining. And I don't know who wins that fight, because Figueroa, he's a couple inches taller than the other guys in the division, but he fights like he's a few inches taller than the other fighters in the division. And his style is that where it's a little bit like Sebastian Fundora, but a little bit different as well. But he kind of drapes over you like a blanket, where it's almost like you've got like this cascading cloud over your head, and no matter how many times you hit him cleanly, he's going to be draped over you. And you saw that play out in Stephen Fulton versus Brandon Figueroa. That is, to me, Stephen Fulton's most difficult fight since becoming either a title contender or a title holder, which he now has 2 of the 4 belts. He had a little bit easier work with Angelo Leo just before that, but he had much easier work, in my assessment, versus Danny Roman. I'm going to get to some of what you're saying. Jay Foreman said he was rooting for Nonito Donaire, but Inoue's quickness and power were just too much. Donaire is almost 40, right? Yeah, 39 years old, damn near 40. Impressive to still be competing at this level. True, especially when you couple that with his last 2 wins against Nordino Bali and then against Gaballo, and then his close loss to the monster Inoue in their first fight. But it's going to be interesting to see whether Nonito Donaire retires, whether he tries to continue to campaign at 118, assuming that the monster Inoue leaves the division. But do you see him like operating in the wake of Inoue, like in the ashes that Inoue leaves behind at 118? Do you think Nonito Donaire is going to continue to campaign at 118? Is he going to go back to 122? Because keep in mind, before he dropped all the way back down to 118 to compete in that World Boxing Super Series, where he ended up meeting Inoue in the finals, he was fluctuating between 122 and 126 for several years. And he had, good success in 122 before he lost to Guillermo Rigondeaux, less success at 126. So then he came back to 122, where he lost to Jesse Magdaleno, and then he finally came back down, and Carl Frampton. Then he came back down to 118, and this is where he's had the most success in several years. So I don't know if he goes back to 122. I can't picture. Can you picture like Nonito Donaire fighting MJ Akhmadaliev, Stephen Fulton, Danny Roman, probably Danny Roman? I think that would be a competitive fight, I think. Or against Brandon Figueroa. I don't know. Like, he still has a lot of pop in his gloves, but it'll also be interesting if Naoya the Monster Inoue decides to go up to 122, if he's going to have any success against either Stephen Fulton or MJ Akhmadaliev. I'm assuming and hoping that they make a battle for Undisputed at 122 between Fulton and Akhmadaliev. I'm still not sure who I would favor to win that fight. But if the monster Inoue goes to 122, I think that will create the conditions to where you will have more eyeballs and less than avid boxing fans, like kind of casual fans to somewhat avid boxing fans, to put more attention on some of the, we'll say, less, like lighter than lightweight and 130, basically featherweight and below, to truly spotlight those lower divisions. I think that the monster going to 122 would do a lot to solve that discrepancy in attention if he fights like a Stephen Fulton. Robert Reese said, hot facts with Robert Reese said, Donaire needs one more big retirement fight. Yeah, I don't think he wants to go out on that note. Benny Bronx says, I love to see Chocolate Tito and Rahman fight Inoue. So here's the thing with that. Chocolate Tito is at 115, right? So he would have to go up to fight the monster Inoue. Do you want to see a smaller and older Chocolate Tito going up to fight a 20-something-year-old knockout king like the monster Inoue? I'm truly thinking, remember when Chocolate Tito got smoked by Rungvisai in their second fight? I feel like Inoue probably blows Chocolate Tito out at this. I could be totally wrong, but I think that the monster has his way with Chocolate Tito at this point of Chocolate Tito's career. James says, not sure what Flash does after this. I'd say call it a career and go into the Hall of Fame. Too small for 122 and 126. I tend to agree. I think that at this stage, nearly 40 years old, I mean, you've got some young studs right now at 122. I just don't think that it would go well. I think that the only play is if he waits for Inoue to leave 118 and then maybe win another title if you want to do something like that. Or maybe if you could find perhaps another big name that's sticking around. Check this out. If Chocolate Tito wants to go up to 118 and fight like a star level name fight, but somebody who won't, or hopefully won't, destroy you, I think Chocolate Tito versus Nonito Donaire at 118 might be a good, not a crossroads fight, but a retirement fight for Donaire and something to, just a good fight and hopefully a high-paying fight for Chocolate Tito. Here, let me plug this in. I just want to make sure that at no point does this thing run out of juice. Good looking honky says, Woog, are you the third brother of the Currys? I've had so I've had people say Steph Curry, and then my cousin who's from the Bay, so he likes to kind of hoorah. He likes to bust your balls, if you will. He looks at me, he's like, nah, Seth Curry. He ain't Steph. He's Seth Curry. He had jokes. James said, no shame at all in losing to the monster. He's the only fighter to hurt. Yeah, Nonito Donaire pushed the monster in that first fight in a way that we hadn't seen any opponents push the monster. Because if you look at his record, it was nothing but it was mostly littered with a bunch of first, second, and third round knockouts. And the fact that Donaire took him the distance in the way that he did in that first fight, that in itself was remarkable. But yeah, I want to see whether Inoue goes up to 122. But it's going to be interesting. We're probably going to get some sort of an announcement one way or another from Nonito Donaire, who's been, very, forthcoming in interviews, and he's been very transparent in terms of what his process has been and what his mindset has been in this late stage of his career. Let's see. Heck yeah. So what else? So there are a few bits of news that I also wanted to get to. A lot taking place right now. Jamal Charlo hurt his back. So his not awaited, some fights are long awaited. His not awaited fight with Sulechki has been postponed. In fact, the whole fight card is postponed. Now, this fight card had a couple of good emerging undercard fighters like Rais Alim. He's another 122-pounder to look out for, by the way. He's a lesser belt holder, so he's one of those guys who's knocking at the door at 122. Rais Alim. And then the Derek James trained Frank Martin was on that undercard for Charlo versus Sulechki as well. So it sucks that, first and foremost that Jermall Charlo hurt his back, because people assume because these are professional athletes, we see them bounce back from injuries all the time, to where we take physical health for granted and assume that we're going to see them back at 100% because of modern technology and everything like that. But when you start talking back issues, I'm of the belief that you can assume nothing. I don't know that we're ever going to see a 100% Jermall Charlo back in the ring, depending on how serious this back injury is. Now, was this a precautionary thing where it wasn't a serious back issue, but he wanted to be careful about it because it is, after all, your back? I mean, talk to anybody with back issues. There is nothing more debilitating. It sounds like that. This is what has been told to me. I've had like a pinch back, like if you are doing like some sort of a workout and you pinch your back and it hurts for like a couple weeks, but there's nothing more debilitating than having a bad back. So is this a minor injury or a serious injury? And if it's a serious injury, again, you can assume nothing in terms of the timetable of return or even the level of quality of fighter and performance level that you're going to get whenever he does return. So if he returns, first of all, I was thinking at first, it would be kind of cool if they just like scrap this whole Charlo versus Sulechki fight and hopefully make like, I don't know, if it's on your wish list type of fight, Charlo versus Munguia, or just a fight that people want to see. Charlo versus Benavidez up at 168, or against Demetrius Andrade, against anybody, right? But Sulechki or anybody of that Sulechki or below level. But then I'm thinking, well, it's a back injury. So you probably want to come back against an opponent that you are relatively sure that you could beat, because you can't, again, assume that you're going to be at 100%. So unfortunate for Jermall Charlo, unfortunate for that whole fight card, including the up-and-comers that were going to be featured on the undercard here. And then Derek Chisora versus Kubrat Pulev was announced. I don't know how many people are fired up about that. I'm not too fired up. It's going to be a fun fight. Pulev just looked good against Jerry Forrest on that Triller card. And Pulev looked good against Frank Mir. Was it that he just knocked out pretty quickly? He fought some former UFC fighter and knocked him out on, I believe, another. It might not have even been Triller. It might have been that Triad. Or is it Triller Triad? Either way, Derek Chisora versus Kubrat Pulev was announced. Let me get to TJ, what's going on? Thanks for stopping by. Heck yeah. Thoughts on Edgar Berlanga? Yeah, we're definitely going to get to that Edgar Berlanga fight coming up this weekend. I'm not crazy about that matchup, but we'll definitely get into it. Jay Foreman, I've heard back injuries can be pretty painful and serious. Yeah, I hope it's not severe for Jermall Charlo. It has been a disappointing run at 160, just being that, unlike his smaller brother, Jermell, we haven't seen him fight the guys that fight the fights that matter, I like to say. But we know that he's a very talented fighter. We know that he was one of the best fighters at 154 when he was campaigning there. And he's held the WBC belt for like a couple years now, right? But even though nobody wanted to see him fight Korborov or, Dennis Hogan, any of the guys, even Montiel, the one that he had a little bit of difficulty in. We didn't want to see any of that. So it sucks that he's hurt, and I do hope that he recovers 100%. Benny Bronx asks, what's your take on David Morrell versus David Benavidez if it happens? I would say wait about a year for David Morrell. He might get there, but, like Liam Neeson in Taken, David Benavidez has a special set of skills, a very unique set of skills. Rarely do you have somebody who hits that hard, throwing that many punches, throwing that many power punches accurately, having a chin, having 12-round durability where you're basically throwing just as many punches in the 10th round as you were in the second round. It's too much, I think, right now. But, David Morrell is looking very promising. So I would love to see it in the future, but not the too near future. We're talking, I think, a year and a half plus down the line. And plus, David Benavidez, I think he's got other fish to fry that he needs to be locking horns with now or very, very soon. Like, we need to see David Benavidez. I think the fight to make, Benavidez versus Caleb Plant. They're both on PBC. To me, there is no excuse not to make it. They're both at 168. David Benavidez versus Caleb Plant, I think it speaks for itself, you know? And stylistically, and plus the fact that they have bad blood, don't like each other, stylistically, because Caleb Plant is such a sweet science technical boxer, and David Benavidez is such a physical outlier, I think that matchup kind of makes itself. Yeah, Morrell has been calling him out. I thought that was pretty brash, you know, for him to call out somebody who nobody's really calling out. Like, who else is calling out David Benavidez? David Benavidez is doing the calling out, you know, and other people are saying, or, you know, just making up reasons like, I got something to do on Saturday. I can't make it, you know. Benjamin Tucker, what's going on? Thank you for, heck yeah, my cousin Benji. Thank you for stopping by. Avid boxing fan. Really good athlete, too. Excellent athlete, actually. Derek Chisora never gets an easy touch. True, TJ. Derek Chisora, if you look at strength of schedule, I mean, say what you want about his win some, lose some success in some of these fights against excellent fighters. It's almost criminal how many tough fights Derek Chisora has had relative to other guys. Like, you have some fighters who will take on a difficult fight like every fourth fight or every third fight. I mean, to me, Joseph Parker, these back-to-backs that Chisora had against Joseph Parker, that might have been some of his easier touches. Like, the guy's fought Tyson Fury twice. He's fought Dillian White twice. He's fought just about everybody at heavyweight that could really hurt you, except for Deontay Wilder and Anthony Joshua. Yeah, Chisora and Joshua never fought. Yeah, Joshua and Wilder. Everybody else, Chisora has fought once or twice. It's pretty devastating. But, I mean, hats off to him for being willing to take on those tough fights, because we know most elite fighters sure as hell aren't. DJ Johnson says, after Bud beats Spence, do you think he should fight Shakur next? First of all, DJ Johnson, thanks for stopping by. That is one hell of an assumption, right? I'm back and forth on Bud versus Spence. I really fluctuate. 80% of the time, I was thinking Spence over the past few years. In recent weeks, I was talking to my buddy Drew. Majin the Artist is his artist name, great graphic and visual artist. But he was convincing me that Terrence Crawford not only probably beats Spence, but might stop Spence. So I've just been back and forth. But if Bud, we'll say if Bud rather than after Bud at this point, I'm going to spot Spence more respect than that, at least at this juncture. But we'll do deeper dives once this fight actually gets made. Do you think he should fight Shakur next? Shakur's way too small. You know, he's 130. He was just coming off 126 a few fights ago. He's now, I mean, a super solid 130, and I think he's going to wreak havoc at 135. But 147, no time soon. It's more likely that Crawford goes up to 154 and tries to make an impact there. I don't think we'll ever get Terrence Crawford versus Shakur Stevenson. Plus, they're like good homies. I just don't think it's going to happen. Jay Foreman says, Chisora versus Pulev sounds like fun, to be honest. I agree. Let's remember when we just saw, Lucas Brown versus Junior Fa. That took place this past weekend. Early knockout of Junior Fa. Junior Fa had the super close fight with Joseph Parker, a fight that really could have gone either way. I feel like Joseph Parker has been the beneficiary of some very, very close decisions. And I feel like most Joseph Parker fights end up being very close, whether it's a guy who you think he should be able to clearly outclass or somebody who you don't know going in who's going to win the fight. A Joseph Parker fight is usually a close one. And